Hello, it's Carol Martine, welcoming you back to my studio. I thought today I would take another visit back in my time machine and see what I was working on in early 2016. These are two things that I'm going to share today. The first is my folded journal. This was a rather large sheet of watercolor paper that I cut and folded, and this was the front and back cover. On this piece I used a piece of collage as my focal, and I see here that I have some applied napkins around the edge with many layers of paint and stenciling and a few of my flowers. I was really wondering how this was going to work, but somehow when I did this front and back cover, it seemed to fall in place that this was a doable project, my first ever. The two inside flaps, if you will notice, this one was done with a lot of stenciling and doodling, and this is a I believe, yes, this is a stencil also, and I used some of my Target's Shimmer Egg and some mauve to bring out the pieces on the coloring here. The other flap, again, some of my Shimmer Egg, and you must admit that it gives a nice effect. These flowers are done in acrylic. My goal here, as I remember, was to keep this cool and spring-like. After all, it was done in April, on April 19th. So, we have the front and back cover, the two inside flaps, and if we open this folded journal further, we'll see I have a four-page spread here in which I used one of my very large stencils and added some flowers. Again, a low-key pushed back background of stenciling using aqua greens, and one of my very favorite little flower stamps. This piece was quite a learning experience because I had never worked on such a large, narrow piece, but I was quite tickled with the result on this. Now, as you can see, this paper, you can see the full impact of this paper and the fold, which maintained right here. This is the full sheet. So let's go now and turn it over and see where we are. Ah, yes. In June, I worked on another favorite stencil and another napkin. Here I was starting to work on trying to apply napkins without too much dimensionality. And if you will notice, I think that I was able to keep this fairly flat. There are some folds, which would be expected, but not too many, because I was starting to realize that these floral napkins had a lot of potential, but I felt, and that's of course is my personal opinion, that if they have too many folds because of the wet medium used to apply them, puckering them up, it makes it hard to work on them on top of the napkin. So I think I was starting to get the hang of doing that. And there's my old standby Joe Sonja gold paint, my tube of paint that must be at least 15 or 20 years old and still going. I don't seem to be able to get to the bottom of it. Now the other spread for this one is this, and on this one I wanted to try my hand at layering using my first handmade stamps. I also feel that I use some of the black pearl dots on this to give centers to these flowers. And yes, I also used underneath, I used a script stencil. So, for the full spread, then for the last section of this folded journal, I did another blue piece in which I used a stencil of my own that I had cut and some more of my homemade stamps and an oblong stencil, which I'm quite tickled with. They seem to really work well, and I use them on all occasions when I'm able, and as many shades of blue as I could manage to pile on to this, and I had great fun doing it. This side was this spread was done on 7/20. My last one was my girl, and I'm quite tickled with her. Here again, if you'll notice, I'm working on becoming proficient in working on this on hair using Inktense blocks. And I find that I just like the effect of the hair because it somehow looks a bit natural to me. This face is done in acrylic, and I have managed to get many, many colors into her eyes and really enjoy doing that. Also, was starting to use some Prismacolor pencils for shading, and some gray. I believe it either was a gray Prismacolor pencil or just an ordinary number 2 pencil to add shading and roundness to her eyes. Another one of my large stencils, and more flower practice. So here we have the back of this folded journal. Here again, and the final closed version. I'm thinking I might want to try another one of these, although I'm not too sure whether I will get to one. But let me know what you think, whether or not I should try another. Also, we have this. These were on sale, I believe, in Michael's, and they were hidden away for quite a long time until, for some reason, I was pawing around in a plastic bin and found this and decided to give it a try. I began this one in February of this year, and I used my first ever try at a face. I cut this out and used it as a collage on my front cover of this journal, which I call my First Lady journal, because basically she is my First Lady. And you can see I had lots to learn, but because she was my first, it's like my first child, I love this to death. I also used, I can tell here that I used stamps, and just generally had a great fun working on this. And I applied, although I'm not too tickled with the outcome, I applied a semi-gloss finishing varnish on this, and I'm not too thrilled with the way this looks when it's in its close-up, but live and learn. The back of my book, again, that I finished in November, just last month, I used a page from a journal that I had done the year before. One of my very first attempts at doing a face. And as you can tell, I had lots to learn, but fun, great fun doing it. So, a First Lady and a Second Lady on the front and back. And then this spread was done in March. More girl practice, this time using a napkin for hair, practicing my Carol flowers. I was finding that I was underpainting. I decided to try underpainting her face with watercolor and then putting acrylic over top. And I'm quite tickled with her lips. Her eyes, here again, using the number 2 pencil to shade, but she's rather solemn looking. So I guess that's how I was feeling, working so hard at accomplishing her, that she came out to look a little bit solemn, but I think the flowers for hair kind of help her. My next was, as you can see, more practice with my Carol Doodle flowers, trying to learn how to work acrylics with some gilding on top, and using my cut brayer as background. This is due to paint coming in from the other side, and I decided to leave it there because it's a learning experience that when you have something face down, that doesn't mean that some gesso can't sneak in from another spread. Actually, I'm going to say that it gives it character. Yes, here it is. There's the culprit, crept under. Here, again, I wanted to do something that was a little bit abstract and yet doodling. So the sky was the limit on this one, and I turned out to be quite tickled with it. This has a little bit of collage underneath. This flower has a bit of collage, as you can tell right here. But I'm liking this area particularly. Even though the colors work to get gray together, they still seem to tickle me and work very well with this. This was another girl practice, a napkin. My first try at using just a little bit of oil pastel to deepen color some doodle practice. And my girl, she is a collage from a magazine, and I just worked on top of her, used what I had, and tried to, again, practice work. Now, here again, if you will notice, let me get closer, that sometimes the acrylic paint can get almost scratchy looking. But when you look at her in total, she does not look too bad, even though the brush marks and the brush strokes show on her face. All in all, she kind of tickled me, even though she was a cheat because she's a collage from a magazine. Here's another girl in which I wanted to practice a different face shape. This is quite different, but there again, as you'll notice, more working on using my Derwent blocks for hair, and I'm liking that more and more. Some practicing of doodle flowers, many layers of stenciling, and as I remember here, I even tried stenciling her dress. This was one of my early practices from my sketchbook, and I cut her out and collaged her down. She was a piece of, yes, I can feel it right here. She was a piece of ordinary printer paper. This one I decided to burst out of my mold and go for broke and use some black and some of my very, very favorite leaf stencils, and to see how many layers I could apply here, and there are many, many of them. I think, as I remember, there were about 9 or 10 before I put this final flower on the stencil and decided that it just needed to be black that day. Here, more work with napkins, and if you'll notice, more practice in getting them flat. There is a certain amount of wrinkling under here because of the wetness and what happens to the napkin when it is applied to the gel medium and it's put under the matte medium and it's put over the top, but still it makes it workable for playing on top of the napkin without it ripping or loss. Fall was coming. As you can see, it's September, so I found some background sheets of paper and applied those, and then my fall stencils and colors, doodling, but leaving this section of the piece of paper so that it would show. Over here, I applied more, I can feel them, I applied more collages of pieces of fall ephemera. And, as I remember, I had just gotten this puppy, and this is what gave this effect, and I do like it, and it's really going to become a good friend because it certainly seems to lay down and push things back without knocking them out completely. So that one was September. Whoops, we have a little sticking here. More Life of Art. Yes, right there. I'll have to repair that. No, I don't think I'll repair that. That's just a fact of life. I should have put some waxed paper in between. Here, it's a combination of doodle flowers and stencils, and again, trying for a fall color theme. This one was done shortly before Halloween. I'm sorry, disappointed that this happened. Maybe I'll work to try to remove some of that. But, as I said, I brought that on myself because I did either not wax it. Now, I'm not a great lover of waxing things, but I will put a piece of waxed paper in between. And I didn't do it, so there you see what can happen. So, I hope that you have enjoyed looking back at my art this year. And if you have, I would so appreciate it if you would give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, share with a friend, and I would certainly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel. Bye now.